Hello chess lovers, Suren here, and in this video let's take a look at Mikhail Tal's last game, which became the swan song of the 55-year-old former world chess champion. In this game, Tal's opponent is Armenian chess player Vladimir Akopian, who at the time of this game was 20 years old, although was rated higher than Tal. Akopian's rating was 26.05 and Tal's rating was 25.25. This game occurred on the 5th of May 1992 at the very finish of the Grandmaster tournament in Barcelona. Now let's see what happened on the board. Mikhail Tal had white pieces and he started the game with e4. c5 by Vladimir Akopian. Akopian goes for Sicilian defense, knight f3, knight c6 and bishop b5. Against Sicilian defense, Mikhail Tal is choosing the Nezhmetdinov-Rossolimo attack. At the time of this game, Mikhail Tal was unwell and had a high temperature, and therefore after making this bishop b5 move, he offered a draw. But fortunately for chess, he received a refusal, and now we can enjoy this fascinating encounter. d6 by Akopian, white castles kingside, bishop d7, rook e1, knight f6, c3, white is preparing to establish a strong center, a6 and bishop a4. The heavily analyzed gambit which can arise after bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, d4, bishop takes e4, bishop g5 was not to Tal's taste against the well-prepared world junior champion. That's why after a6 Tal played bishop a4. Now comes c4. Black is not allowing white to form a strong center, and after d4 Akopian captured en passant. Bishop g5. Tal is not hurrying to win back the lost pawn e6. Only now we see queen takes d3, bishop e7 and bishop takes f6. An interesting decision by the former world chess champion. He is damaging black's pawn structure on the king side, but actually there is nothing wrong with black's position. Usually in some lines black can even leave his king in the center of the board because this powerful pawn structure can serve as a shield and can successfully safeguard black king. Of course, black was forced to recapture with the pawn, otherwise could lose the pawn on d6. That's why in the game we see g takes f6 and Tal also captured on c6, allowing black to get a bishop pair, because at some point black could play knight e5 and capturing on e5 could have been met with d takes e5. That's why Tal decided to get rid of that knight. Bishop takes c6 is on the board, bishop takes c6, c4, Tal is freeing the c3 square for the knight, black castles kingside, the g file is open, but actually there is nothing wrong with black's kingside. It's very difficult to exploit that weakness. Knight c3 and king h8. By playing king h8, Akopian is freeing the g8 square for the rook, and now after rook g8, black can start putting pressure on white's king side. And also, if black can manage to activate his bishops, then that will be a dream position for black. Now comes rook d1, rook g8, queen e3, queen f8. Black is not allowing the queen intrusion, and at the same time Akopian is freeing the d8 square for the bishop. Later we will see that beautiful maneuver. Knight d4, rook c8, f4, bishop d7, b3, the pawn on c4 was under attack, and bishop d8. Akopian wants to activate his dark squared bishop. Knight f3 and an interesting decision by Akopian, b5. But Tal's answer was stronger. Queen a7. Of course, capturing on b5 favors only black because black can play bishop a5, come after the knight on c3. If rook d3, then a takes b5. Black is starting to create problems for white. Actually, black's position stands much better. That's why after b5 Tal played queen a7, bishop c7. Well, instead of playing bishop c7, playing bishop a5 looks more active. If queen takes d7, then bishop takes c3, and actually this gives black better chances. If rook e2, then black can go for d5. And right now, of course, c takes d5 can be very dangerous because black can play queen c5 check and then rook c7, trapping white queen. Let's go back in the game. After queen a7, we see bishop c7, queen takes a6. In return, we see b takes c4 and b4. Tal could also capture on c4, but okay, he had different ideas. b4, he's getting two passed pawns on the queen side, but let's see, can he make use of them? Queen g7. Right now there is a mating threat, and after g3, Akopian went for this important d5 move. He takes d5. In return, we see bishop takes f3, and already there are some very devastating bishop takes g3 threats. That's why Tal played king f2. So far so good. Black was doing great. Actually, black has a huge advantage. But in this position, Akopian made a mistake and played f5, which actually allows white to equalize the game. Instead of playing f5, e takes d5 could give black better chances. Now if g takes f4, then this can be winning for black. Black can give a check from g2 square and then can give a check from e8 and then rook c6. It's important first to kick away white queen from the 6th rank and then capture on e5. This is going to be winning. That's why after e takes d5, white should play knight e2. Although after rook a8, queen b7, rook takes a2, queen takes d7, bishop takes g3 check, h takes g3, queen takes g3 check, king e3, rook a3 check. Still, black is maintaining an advantage and a very dangerous attack. But in the game after king f2, we see f5. Akopian is opening up the queen's diagonal. G takes f4 was played, and in return Akopian captured on c3. Queen d6, a very important move. Tal is both attacking the light squared bishop, and at the same time this queen later is going to come on the long diagonal, creating too many problems for black. Bishop a4, the rook on d1 is under attack, and a powerful move, rook d4. Tal is both moving away his rook under the fire and at the same time is blocking the queen's diagonal, and already queen e5 check is the threat. Rook g7. In a time trouble, Akopian is making a mistake. Instead of playing rook g7, rook g6 could allow him to keep the balance. If d takes e6, then rook g8. If knight g5, then f6. And here actually it's even possible the repetition of moves. Of course not f takes g5, because white can give a check from e5 square, and then f takes g5 and then rook h4 check. Black will lose his queen. But in the game after rook d4, we see rook g7, and now Mikhail Tal will seize the initiative. Here comes d takes e6, bishop c6. On the surface it looks like that black is still attacking, but it turns out that Tal has a very cunning surprise in store. Now comes knight g5, after which Akopian captured on g5. By the way, instead of rook takes g5, if f takes e6, then queen e5 is very strong. The threat is rook d8 check, winning the queen. Let's go back in the game. After knight g5, we see rook takes g5. The idea is that if f takes g5, then black can simply checkmate white king. That's why after rook takes g5, Tal first gave a check from e5 square, a very beautiful Zwischenzug, after which black simply loses his queen. Rook g7. Well, if king g8, then he takes f7 check, and in this case black king can even find himself in a mating net. And then the rook is coming and it's over. Black king is getting checkmated. That's why after queen e5 check we see rook g7, but this both steps into a deadly pin, and at the same time after rook d8 check, black is losing his queen. Rook takes d8, queen takes c3, the rest is easy. Black's position is hopeless. Now comes e7, rook a8, queen takes f6, bishop e4. Well, if rook takes a2 check, then simply king e3. If rook a8, then the rook is coming, and actually after the exchange of rooks, white can give a check from f8 square, and then this king can pick up the c pawn and then will support the b pawn to march forward, and the game is over. This is going to be an easy win. After queen takes f6, we see bishop e4. Black is blocking the e file, but now the rook is joining the attack from g file. Rook takes a2 check, a desperate attempt, but after king e1, Akopian resigned. After this move, there is a mate in 3. If rook a1 check, then white can simply win that rook, and then black king is simply getting checkmated. A very dramatic and double-edged game, I think. After this wonderfully played game, Tal was in an excellent spirits. He said that he would fly to Moscow for another operation and hoped that by autumn he would be fully recovered. Around 2 months later, Tal died in Moscow hospital and was buried in his native Riga. He left us too early, leaving us his wonderful games. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this game. For more games, consider subscribing to my channel. I will see you in the next video.